Today, I thought I'd begin my sermon with a very familiar story to all of you, I'm sure. It's called The Ugly Duckling. I heard this story when I was maybe 7, I want to say. And when I first heard it, it was just shocking to find out the outcome of the true identity of the ugly duckling. And if you had never read the book, that's okay. You probably heard or saw the Disney rendition here and there, or Disney version of the story. I'm going to tell you a short, summarized version of what the ugly duckling is. So, this mother duck had, let's say, 6 eggs. And 5 eggs were sort of similar in size, and the 6th egg was a little bit bigger. But other than the slight, small difference in the size of the egg, which was a little bit bigger, everything else looked the same. And she sat on it, and time went by, and she sat on it a little bit longer, and more time went by, and she heard crackling and a little bit of sound coming. So she looked down, and there were 5 ducklings that were born. I don't know if you've ever seen a real duckling and how just cute they are with their tiny little beaks and yellow fur that comes out. And there were just beautiful little ducklings that came out. But the 6th egg that was a little bit bigger than all the rest didn't crack. There was no life or activity or signs of life. So mother duck had to sit on it a little while longer. And a day went by, another day went by, and nothing. And she was a little bit concerned and worried about the last egg. But finally, it hatched and came out gray duckling. And of course, the gray duckling's 5 siblings, the yellow, small, cute ducklings, made fun of it, didn't want to play with it. Whenever they went to a pond and they were going for a swim, frogs and other animals would take a look and take notice that is an ugly duckling. Pretty soon, because of what other people have said, the ugly duckling realized that it really is ugly, that it is different, and that it's not like all the rest, as every other ducklings in the pond. To make the long story short, the gray duckling was actually a cygnet, which means it was a swan, a baby swan. And later on in the version that I read, the mother swan returns to get a cygnet, a baby swan, and they're reunited. Life can be like that, but today the story of Ruth is similar in the sense that Naomi in the story defines who she is based on the outer shell of her life. Everybody said it's a duck. It looks like a duck, it's an eggshell, but the true identity of what it will become is not in the outside shell. The eggshell does not define what it is that is inside the shell. But Naomi, because everyone told her that your life is terrible, and she felt that her life was terrible, and she began to believe that she herself is terrible, and she names herself Mara, which means bitter. She said, my life is terrible, my life is horrible, nothing is going right for me. Really basically saying, I'm an ugly duckling, and everybody in Israel is happy, everybody in Israel is doing well except for me. But just like the ugly duckling, the book of Ruth doesn't end there. God comes to transform that ugly duckling, to transform the bitter name that Naomi gave herself. Call me Mara, she said. Call me bitter, Mrs. Bitter. But God transforms her heart through providing her with his loving kindness. And we will talk about the loving kindness a little bit more as we go into this story, into this sermon. But I want to share with you a little bit more about Naomi's life so that you understand why she thought her life was Mara and why she identified herself with the eggshell of her life, the outside of her life, the things that went around her true identity, the yoke that is inside, which God gave. You know, God named her as her child, as his child, but for Naomi, that was never her identity. It was the outside shell that defined who she was. When Naomi was fairly young and she was a lovely young lady, she got married to a nice Jewish man. And they got married. They had 2 boys. They had a piece of property to their name, which was good enough to provide a living for them. But one day, a famine struck her hometown. And they decide to leave their hometown of Bethlehem. And so they leave. But here's the thing. We've been reading thus far on the promised land, how God has provided a land and took Israelites out of land of Egypt and brought them into a promised land. But now what they are doing is they're going out of the promised land into the pagan territory of Moab. Rather than exploring other parts of Israel, they have decided to go out and make a new living for themselves. And I'm sure there were some bright spots along the way. Her 2 boys got married to a Moabite woman. Perhaps they felt that that was unfortunate, but that was the reality of life, and she accepted it as that. But pretty soon, the tragedy struck Naomi's life. Her husband passed away. And soon, her eldest son passed away. And after that, similar to the story of Job, her second and last born son passed away. You know, there's a great joy in in ancient Palestine to have boys who will carry on the name and inherit the land, and who's strong enough to do all the difficult, hard work that defined Israel's life. But she lost them. There were no more males in her life, and her name will be erased from the face of the earth. She calls 2 of her daughter-in-laws. First one is Orpah, and the second one is Ruth, which the book is named after. At that moment, she calls them and she basically asks them to leave, or she cannot provide for them any longer. So here we see that Naomi has internalized her eggshell life, what is happening in her outside of her life. And she takes those tragedies and says, I'm going to change my name to Mara because my life is bitter and my life is terrible. And sometimes we can be like that ourselves, because when things are going well and your life seems very promising and you're making all these decisions and everything is going right, and all of a sudden, one thing after another, something goes wrong. There's illness in the family. Maybe you get laid off. There's pandemic, or you're socially isolated, and you don't have the friendship that you thought you once had. So in that, you identify with your outer life and you define who you are. Nobody loves me. I'm terrible. My life is terrible. And we never rename ourselves like Israelites did in the past, but we do become bitter at God, bitter at other people. Good things in life becomes like a rain in the desert, is rare and far in between. Some of us, we become bitter because, well, we just never had a break. We never caught a break and never had a sunny day, it seems like. Everything seems uncertain. Everything seems to be undetermined. And everything that you do hold in your hands seems like, hey, this is nothing significant. And everybody in my life is telling me that you should address it, you should fix it, do something about your life, make decisions, do anything, do something, like anything, and get your life going. But you just feel like you're frozen and you can't move along. You feel that bitterness inside of you and great sense of insecurity, but you don't know what to do about it. What is the solution for Naomi? What is the solution for us who might be going through a difficult time? What is it that we really need? What would you give to Naomi if you were God? What would you give to yourself if you were God? She certainly needed money. She certainly needed her boys back. She certainly wanted her husband back. And she needs lodging, place to sleep, place to eat. But when you are a single woman in that time, there is really nothing you can do to provide for yourself. You are at the mercy of the kindness of your extended family and maybe even strangers. At least in Israel, there was a rule where strangers and orphans and widows can come during the harvest season and pick up all the pieces of grain or whatever vegetables that they had, and they can pick up those things. And the widows and orphans and strangers were allowed to pick up what was left behind. So Naomi wants to go back to her hometown. And this is where the story picks up. Naomi sets her two daughter-in-laws, and she says to them, I want you to go home. I'm going back to my home, and you should go back to yours. I cannot provide for you. You are just like me. Your life will be bitter, and your life will be horrible. There's no future for me, but at least for you, you're young enough. You can get remarried again and have someone in your life. Orpah said, no, I'm not going, but Naomi is persistent. Naomi is sincere in wishing the best for Orpah and Ruth. And Orpah finally gets convinced. But Ruth, on the other hand, she does not. She says, where you lodge, and this is sort of an ESV language there. It's not saying where, if you live in North York, I will live in North York or Thornhill. So we'll see each other. I will be your neighbor. No, she's saying where you sleep and eat, that is a place where I will sleep and eat. In short, I will be your roommate. Where your people will be my people. I'm a Moabitess. I know that Israelites they hate Moabitess. But your people will be my people. Even though they may hate me, I will accept them as my people. And I will take all the racism and all this judgmental look like, aha, Moabitess, you don't have a husband. And you're poor. You deserve it because God gave that to you. All that making fun of and bullying, she's saying, I will take it. And your God, although I'm not familiar with him, will be my God. And this will not just be until you get yourself on your feet or you find a government housing, but until I die. I will be buried next to you, and this is what I will give to you. What Ruth offered to Naomi was an outrageous offer of loving kindness. In Hebrew, as I shared with you before, in previous sermons many months ago, the word here in Hebrew is hesed. And hesed is not a word that is easily translated into English, but it means long, loyal, unending loving kindness. It's not a kind of love where you look at a person and say, oh, I love you, but it's kindness. There's gestures, there's actions, and there's a commitment that goes on, and is really how Paul describes love, that love is patient and love is long-suffering. And Ruth, a Moabite woman, a widow, shows what God's love looked like to an Israelite Jewess. Naomi received this kind of love, not because she was spectacular, but because we don't know. Only really shining moment in her life is when she says to her daughter-in-laws, just go home, have a life of your own. And that was pretty selfless, but the rest of the book, she is pretty much complaining from beginning to the end. But God provided for Naomi through Ruth, and eventually through Boaz, who marries Ruth and takes Naomi under his care and provides home, place to live, and food and clothing on her back. When Naomi's life was defined by the eggshell that was outside of the yoke, God is saying to her, what you truly need is not just food. What you truly need for you, because you define yourself as someone who's bitter and someone whose life is terrible, what you truly need is not material things, but loving kindness. And I will give that to you through a person that you would not expect. When our life turns bad and we are defining ourselves through the eggshells of life, the outside of things of life, we need a lot of things. We need to know what career we want. We need to get back the things that we lost. And we want to have jobs and lodging and securities in our life. And those things are important. And let me just say this to you. Work hard. Do your best to earn a living. But the outer shell of life does not define who you are in God. God is giving all of us loving kindness, not only through His Son, not only through people that we may have encountered in our life, but ultimately through His Son. That He's given us salvation through grace, so that we don't define ourselves based on the outside things of life. Imagine the terrible angst that the ugly duckling must have felt, because everybody in the pond defined it by its outer shell. But the shell is just what keeps the inside for the time being. Who we truly are, is that God so loved the world that He gave His only begotten Son. That you are a recipient of His loving kindness. That when you are bitter, when things don't turn out, you'll be surprised how God loves you and how God is preparing something in your life. Let me just prove that to you through this story. At the end of the book of Ruth, what the author writes is that Boaz and Ruth is great-grandparents of King David. And King David is the one who brings the true monarchy, true kingdom into Israel. Until then, Israelites were just another tribe, another political body in this massive land in the Middle East. But God brought heavenly reality through King David by saying, your kingdom will last eternally. And from our vantage point now, we know that King David is the ancestor of Jesus Christ. So let's unpack this together. When Israelites wanted a king, they rejected God's rule and they said, we want a king. They get a king by the name of Saul. And that turned out for them terribly. Saul was a terrible king with many, many issues. And because of him, God chooses David to be the next king, a true king, the real eternal king, or sign of the eternal king and the kingdom to come. But here's the thing. God didn't choose David only after Saul made a mistake and he had to find a new solution to fix this problem. He chose Ruth and her loving kindness from several generations before in preparation for the sin and the suffering of Israelites. God made this solution before the problem existed. God quietly prepared a Moabite woman in the very small town of Bethlehem to fix a national issue of Israel. And through solving that national issue, God is also solving the eternal issue by saying, I am faithful to you. I am at work. I haven't forgotten about you. I have prepared ahead of time, several generations before even you sinned. And that is God's loving kindness toward us. If God is God who is preparing even before we are born, maybe it would be silly of us to define ourselves based on simply by the current situations that we have. That I'm no good because my outside, the exterior of my life is not what everyone expects of me. Everyone expected me to be this way. And everyone is defining themselves this way. Everybody is yellow and fluffy, but I'm not. But God will transform your bitter heart. If you know that He has been at work silently, quietly, in unexpected places to bless you, to prosper you, to forgive you, to bring salvation in you, to transform your bitter heart. That is type of God that this story reminds us of. So what does this mean for all of us? Well, I want you to do a couple of things. One, I would like you to share your bitterness and your troubles. Just share. And it doesn't have to be filtered so nicely. I mean, Naomi doesn't do that. She walks into her hometown and everyone's like, hey, Naomi, we haven't seen you in like 3 decades. And she says, that's not my name. My name is Mara. And the word Mara really does come from, well, I won't get into the history, but look it up in Exodus. It's water that cannot be drank. It's like you find a well and you go to drink it because that's the only source of water, and you find corpses inside. And the well is not drinkable. And that's what Naomi is saying, and that's what Naomi is feeling. I am Mara. And I want you to share your sorrows with people around you. And just get that out. Get your story out. And I don't want you to feel that, you need to filter it and say in the nicest way. No. If you're going to be a community, guys, we need to share the bitterness that is inside of us. And secondly, I would like all the community to share a good gossip. And here's what I mean by that. If you ever see a Mara in the church who is in need of help, don't say to other people, you know, Bob is such a complainer. Bob is spiritually immature. Bob doesn't have faith to trust in the Lord. Bob doesn't know that God is preparing something for him even before the problem happened for him. Oh, you immature Bob, why can't you be more like me? No. I want you to share. I want you to gossip in the church in the right way. We typically gossip about the negative things of others, the relational troubles, and our perspective of how the other person is so terrible and how other people have wronged us. And through gossip, we're trying to make a group of people that will rally around us and share the same vision of how terrible the other person is. But this gossip is to say, Mara needs help. She needs loving kindness. She needs fellowship. She needs encouragement. She needs finance. She may need reference. And you share the needs of others and allowing good gossip to spread. Just like in the book of Ruth, you will see over and over again, there are good gossips that Boaz knew about Ruth. And other people have come to gossip about Ruth and her qualities. And other people have come and gossip about Naomi's situation. But not to tear her down. Not to say that she's evil and she's bad and she's being punished. No, to say that she needs help. And I think that's what, just like that good Bethlehem community, I think we can provide that kind of loving kindness that God has given to us. Let us prepare in the same way that God has prepared for us to bless others. If you are like Mara today, if your life is bitter and you only see the shell of your life because other people are defining you in that way too, remember, God transformed Naomi, and even in a simple story of the ugly duckling, that in itself have transformed. The ugly duckling wasn't defined by its shell, but it was defined by who it truly was. You and I are children of God. And life circumstances, even how tragic they might be, does not define us. God sees you. He will not lose sight of you. He will make you into a person that seeks the kingdom of God and all the righteous things so that you will not worry about what you eat and what you will drink. That is your true identity, that you are a child of King. And he has covered you with his wings of loving kindness.